Welcome to this class on fluid mechanics. In the last class, we had derived the Navier-Stokes equations. The Navier-Stokes equations, just recap, they look like rho partial V by partial T plus V dot grad of V is equal to minus grad P plus rho G plus mu times del square V. Now, the aim or why we write these equations is that in addition to this, we also have the continuity equation, which for incompressible cases takes the form del cross V. So together, these are our governing equations for a fluid flow. And if we can solve them, then the solution will give us velocity as a function of xyzt and pressure as a function of xyzt. So this will be coming from the solution. And once we know these, then in problems of engineering interest, often we like to find force applied by the fluid on a body. For example, we'd like to know the lift force on an aeroplane, etc. So then we calculate this force by taking a surface element on the body and finding the normal and shear forces on the element, and then we integrate on the whole body. Of course, while doing this, we have to keep in mind that force is a vector quantity, so we can add only scalar components, and we do this. And from here, now to do this, once again, what you know is that the normal stress on the element, this will be equal to minus P delta Ij plus it was the tau alpha. So this alpha is the normal direction. So you have to add these, and shear stresses would be tau Ij. And so pressure we will get from solution of the Navier-Stokes equations. And tau Ij, once again you have to go to the constitutive equations, and there you know tau Ij as a function of dui by dxj, and this dui by dxj will be obtained from the solution of the velocity field u. So, and thus you can obtain the forces on the body. But now we realize there is one important thing which we need, and this is the boundary condition. Now, the boundary condition, and if the problem is unsteady, we will also need initial conditions. Now, while the velocity field V, this will come from the solution of the equation, but the boundary conditions are something which have to be known before we start solving the equations. And therefore, boundary conditions are something which is we will get from the physics of the problem, and this is something we have to infer on our own, looking at the problem itself. So this will be an input to the problem. Boundary conditions will be an input to the solution of the equations. While the total field is an output, but boundary conditions is something which we have to then give. Now, so then the question comes, how do we determine the boundary conditions? And clearly, as the name says, for determining or knowing the boundary conditions, we look at the boundary of the flow domain. Because inside at every point we will have to find the velocity field. It is not known. And boundary conditions are something which give the expected behavior of the fluid. And these we cannot prove or derive the boundary conditions. So it's something like you look at the problem and you should be able to say what the boundary conditions are. So, and there would be some logic to this while we say we cannot derive them. So now let's start looking at the boundary condition. And typically there are two types of boundary conditions. This is how I classify them. The first one, let's call the velocity boundary condition. So now in velocity boundary condition, what we have is, let's say there is flow taking place in a domain, and at the end of which it's next to a solid wall on one side. On the other side, let's say the flow is going up to infinity. So we have now here, when we talk of the boundary condition, we will look at the solid wall. We will look at the domain of the flow where the fluid ends, and that turns out to be the solid wall. So let's call at the boundary, let us call 1 is the layer of the fluid just above the wall, and 2 is a point on the solid wall. So now the velocity at 1, this is velocity in the fluid. We can divide it into two parts, a tangential component and a normal component. And this normal and tangential will be normal to the area at the boundary. So for example, in this case, when our boundary is like this, so this is the normal. So if I'm taking this as x, y and z direction, if this is a 3D flow, then the normal direction in this case is y, and x and z form the tangential plane. So one thing which seems very obvious is that the normal component of the velocity of 1 and 2 must be equal. And this, in some sense, is coming from mass balance. Because if there is a piercing element in the normal direction, then it has to go inside the boundary and the boundary will have to deform like this. So therefore, the normal component becomes that Vn on side 1 must be equal to the normal component of velocity on the boundary element. So this is the boundary condition which we get for the normal component. Next, let us look at the tangential component. Now in tangential component, there is no sort of formal reason why the tangential component of the velocity at 1 must be equal to the velocity at 2. But physically, we know we have this property called viscosity. The coefficient of viscosity is mu, as we have seen. And because of viscosity, we expect that tangential components of velocity on the two sides will be equal. And this is what we refer to as the no slip condition. We have been using this when we talked of viscosity, we did that, but it is basically something which we expect. And if we combine these two conditions, then what we say is for viscous flows, both tangential and normal component of velocities on both sides of the boundary are equal, and which means that velocity on 1 is equal to velocity on 2, and this is what we would expect to happen. Now, there are some cases where no slip condition is not valid. And once again, because there is no particular reason for no slip condition, no formal reason for this, so the only test of the no slip condition is that you solve your equations using no slip boundary condition, and if you get the right solution, you say it works, otherwise you say it does not work. And as I said, there are some cases where no slip boundary condition is not valid or is not used. And the first of these is, and we will look at this after we complete the Navier-Stokes equation, we look at cases of inviscid flow, where you talk of viscosity not being important. You drop del square V term from the Navier-Stokes equation. So when you do this, then the Vt1 is equal to Vt2 condition is not imposed, because now if viscosity is considered to be negligible, then there is no reason why the tangential components of velocity must be equal. Now, the other cases where sometimes if you coat the wall with certain polymers, and some of these are called the hydrophobic polymers and phobic coating, which does not like water or any liquid. And if there is flow on such a wall, water or liquid on this wall, then the no slip boundary condition is found to be violated. That means there is some slip on the boundary. And these type of flows come mainly in microfluidics. Another condition, if flow of liquid helium on a surface is observed, and here also we find that the no slip condition is violated. But in most viscous flows, we will assume the no slip boundary condition. Now, the second boundary condition which we talk of is the boundary condition on stress. We've looked at the velocity boundary condition. The other physical quantity which we have is the stress. So, stress is also going to provide us boundary conditions, and that is what we are going to now look at. So, once again, we have two types of stresses. There is a normal stress, and let us look at the normal stress. And what we say is the normal stress on both sides of the boundary are equal. Now, this condition, in fact, we will use the same condition not only for normal stress but also for viscous stress, that on both sides, viscous stress on both sides of the boundary on the two elements are equal. And the reason for this, now this is what we are assuming, is that the flow is in some sort of an equilibrium. And what happens is, the reason for doing this is that the boundary element, as we have seen with surface forces, is mass of the boundary element can be neglected, because boundary element is a surface element and quantities like mass, they will be per unit volume, so therefore they will be very small, and therefore the boundary, if you look at the MA term, this will tend to be 0. So therefore what we have is force on both sides of boundary must be equal. And that is the logic for equating the normal stresses and viscous stresses. So now let us focus on the normal component, the normal stress on the boundary. Now, firstly, we will assume that there is no surface tension. In flows with surface tension, there is an extra component of normal force. And this also has to be accounted for. So this normal stress which we have, we will assume in flows with no surface tension. Otherwise, if you come across flow with surface tension, you will see there will be an extra, you'll have to do a force balance, including surface tension. Now, in flows with no surface tension, what we'll find is that then the normal stress will consist of pressure plus the viscous part of normal stress. And in most flows, at least the typical ones which we will do, the viscous normal stress is negligible, and therefore what we will get is pressure on side 1 will be equal to pressure on side 2. And this will be used more when, let us say, 2 is liquid and 1 is either a liquid or a gas. So then such a boundary condition will be used. Otherwise, what we will get is the pressure as a force which we find if one of them is a solid. I'll discuss that case a bit later in this lecture. So the normal condition becomes pressure on the two sides are equal, and mainly will be used when both of these are either liquids or gases, both fluids. Now the next boundary condition we talk of are the viscous shear stresses. And once again, the condition which we said is that the shear stress on both sides are equal. Now, if there is fluid on both sides, you express shear stress as a function of the velocity gradients, and then you will have mu1 times a velocity gradient, whatever terms are there, will be equal to mu2 times the velocity gradient. And once again, this is if both sides of the boundary are fluids. So this in general is what we have for the boundary conditions. Next, we look at what I call usable boundary condition. Usable boundary condition, what I mean is that while we have given these boundary conditions, we are looking at boundary conditions as an input to the flow. Sometimes some of these will also be used from the output side. But let us say flow adjacent to a solid. If I look at flow adjacent to a solid, so there is a solid, or it could be even curved shaped solid, and there is flow past a solid. Now here what we find is the velocity of the solid, which is the velocity of the wall, or if there is some object, this is probably known. The velocity of the solid would be known in wall. If it is a fixed wall, then we know velocity of the wall is 0. If it is a moving wall, then velocity of the wall will be something like V0, which would be known from the problem. For example, if it's a conveyor belt moving, because what you are trying to do is find the flow field in the fluid side. So the velocity when we have a solid boundary will generally be known. So the velocity boundary condition in case of a solid boundary will be a known thing, and this will be a usable boundary condition. Now what about stress on a solid boundary? On a boundary where a fluid is interacting with a solid, what about the stress? Stress actually will be the desired output from the solution, because what we want to know is the force we want to find, force exerted by the fluid on the solid surface. So, as a boundary condition, stress on a solid surface will generally not be usable unless it is specified a priori. So unless solid stress is basically something which you would expect the solution to give to you, and that would be the desired output. Most engineering problems would ask us to calculate force on a solid boundary. Now, if we have fluid on one side and gas on the other side, let us look at these sort of boundaries. That means, let's say there is flow of water in an open channel. So if there is an open channel, the fluid at the top will be air. Now here, when we look at the boundary conditions, the velocity boundary condition will say, let's call this as 0.1, let's call this as 0.2 on the boundary. V1 is equal to V2, which will mean velocity of water side at the top is equal to the velocity of air at the bottom of the air column, or whatever you may call it. Now this boundary condition, while it is true, it does not help us. It is not usable because a priori velocity of air at 2 will not be known. Now once again, in some problems we may be able to give this, but in general the velocity boundary condition on a liquid gas surface will not be known. Now let us talk about the stress boundary condition on such a surface. If we look at the stress boundary condition on this surface, then what we have is the normal stress boundary condition tells us that pressure on the air side will be equal to pressure on the water side, and this is at 2 will be equal to pressure of the water at 1. And typically when we have flow of air under normal circumstances, we say pressure is equal to P atmosphere. So this gives us a usable stress or usable normal stress boundary condition on water. At the top we can say at top pressure is equal to P atmosphere on the water surface. So this becomes a usable boundary condition. Now we also have a similar this thing when we talk of the viscous stresses, and let us take a simple case where we have Vx as a function of y. Now this will be extended later to the general case, but let's derive it. Let's look at a simple case like this. So here now, if we say equality of viscous stresses, in this case we are looking at this flow, what it tells us is mu on the liquid side times dV(XL) on the liquid side by dy is equal to mu on the gas side dVx on the gas side divided by dy, where L is the liquid and G is the gas. If that is so, that means now our flow domain, we are mainly interested in the liquid side flow. So dVx on the liquid side by dy This will be equal to mu g upon mu L dVx on the gas side by dy. Okay, so now given this, what we find is that now this is the observation we make, that mu of gases is much less than mu of liquid. So this is an observation, and this is found to be true for most liquids and gases. So then what we get is mu g upon mu L is much less than 1. Now the velocity, if we look at it, the velocity on 1 and 2 will be equal. So if the velocities are equal and the distances traveled along y directions are equal, then we expect dvx by dy to be of the same order on both sides. And looking at this expression 1, so therefore expression 1 will imply that dvx by dy on the liquid side at the boundary, this will be equal to a very small quantity epsilon multiplied by a quantity of the same order, and so this is dvx by dy on the gas side. And since now we are calling this ratio as epsilon of the viscosity, so because this will be much less than 1, so we can expect dvx by dy on the liquid side to be nearly equal to 0, and we will call this as this becomes then a usable boundary condition. So on a liquid gas interface, the shear stress being equal, leads to dvx by dy equal to 0. So this becomes a boundary condition which we use. Now we have not talked of liquid-liquid boundaries. So we could have a flow of one liquid on the top of another. So let's say we have oil on water. Now, if this I call as 1 and this I call as 2, what are the boundary conditions on the oil-water interface? Here I am assuming that we have to solve for the velocity field for both oil and water. So the boundary conditions we will get is velocity on 1 and 2 will be equal, pressure on 1 and 2 will be equal. Now all of these are unknowns, and so this, and we will get mu of oil and times dv by dy if it's a one-dimensional flow, dvx by dy, and this is on 1 is equal to mu of water dvx by dy on 2, and this is on the liquid-liquid boundary. Of course, there is a boundary of water with the solid surface and boundary of oil with the top surface. They will be dealt as what we have done earlier. But on a liquid-liquid surface, now all of these will be unknown, but you have to impose these to solve the full problem. So this is how we look at the boundary conditions. Okay? And we solve these things. And this was, now when we look at these two boundary conditions, a simple analogy which one makes with thermal studies is possible. If you look at the no-slip boundary condition on a fixed wall, we get the tangential component of velocity is 0, or actually the full velocity will be 0 as normal component is 0, and this is analogous to the boundary condition temperature is equal to constant. Now you may not have done a heat transfer course, but when you do it you will see that in a heat transfer cases, in thermal flows or thermal cases, so in flows with heat transfer, there are two types of boundary conditions. One is the temperature and the other is the heat flux. And the temperature boundary condition is given when we have, then you say T is prescribed or T is equal to constant on a boundary. On the heat flux boundary condition, and one common simplification of this is what we say is the adiabatic or insulated boundary condition on heat, and that is that there is no heat transfer because there is an insulated boundary, and this leads to dt by dy is equal to 0 on the insulated boundary because the heat flux is related to the cross derivative of temperature. So the two cases which we have done are reminders of this. The T is equal to constant is like the no slip boundary condition, and dt by dy is equal to 0, which is the insulated case. This is like the shear stress condition on liquid gas boundary. So this is just a simple sort of analogy and I find it interesting, so that's why I did that. So with this now, with these two discussions, so now we are equipped to look at the full Navier-Stokes equations and their boundary conditions. We have seen how to find this, and one more thing before I leave this discussion on boundary condition. You see that we have now these equations often are solved on computer. We do not have a full exact solutions, and we solve them using what we call CFD, computational fluid dynamics, and a lot of packages are available to solve these problems. But in all the packages, the input to the package is the boundary condition, and you have to specify the boundary condition. That is why trying to understand what the boundary conditions are is something which you will have to do at the start of every problem. You look at the flow and you try to infer the boundary conditions, and this therefore becomes a very important part of solving the whole flow problem. Now, as we were talking, that we look at the Navier-Stokes equations, and one thing which I want to do in the Navier-Stokes equation is we have looked at the Cartesian coordinates, and we have looked at the form of the Navier-Stokes equation. In this, we have done all the derivations of Navier-Stokes equation and continuity equation in Cartesian coordinates. But another coordinates which we will be using will be the cylindrical coordinates, and we looked at a bit of these when we talked of the stream function, and these are the r, theta, z coordinates with unit vectors er, e theta and ez. Now in these coordinates, the velocity vector is written as Vr which is actually a function in general case of all these, plus ER plus V theta R theta Z T E theta plus Vz R theta Z T Ez. Let me just try to familiarize you with some of these aspects of the cylindrical coordinates. So firstly, when we look at the continuity equation in the cylindrical coordinates, so in the continuity equation in cylindrical coordinates takes the form partial rho by partial t plus 1 over r d by dr of r rho Vr plus 1 over r d by d theta of rho times V theta plus d by dz of rho Vz is equal to 0. Now notice that in the r component we have 1 over r d by dr of r Vr. So whereas in the Cartesian coordinates we had things like partial Vx by partial x, partial Vy by partial y, partial Vz by partial z. But in cylindrical coordinates we get there is a partial by partial r of r Vr, and maybe you can think of this 1 over r as something which makes it dimensionally consistent. And similarly in the V theta term you have an extra 1 over r sitting outside, and once more you may think of this to make this as dimensionally consistent. So this extra term comes when we use the continuity equation, and for incompressible cases all the rows will go out. So this is one thing. Secondly, when we look at curl, we'll not look at it right now. In cylindrical coordinates, if I look at del cross A, this becomes now 1 over r ER. There's an extra 1 over r. There is E theta. There's 1 over r Ez. And then we have partial by partial r, partial by partial theta, partial by partial z. And then we have a sub r times a theta and az. So notice you have to be careful when you use cylindrical coordinates. You can't directly just write the equations which we had in the x, y, z. And similarly, when I look at the constitutive equations in r theta z, then what I will get is things of this form. Let's write this. Sigma rr will become minus p plus 2 mu partial Vr by partial r minus 2/3 mu del dot V. So this is the same, and then sigma theta theta, this will be minus p plus 2 mu, and now I have 1 over r partial V theta by partial theta plus Vr by r minus 2/3 mu del dot V. So there are these extra things involving Vr and Rs which come about, and similarly when I write the expression for tau r theta, this will become equal to mu times partial V theta by partial r minus V theta by r plus 1 over r partial V theta by partial theta. In xy it was simple partial Vx by partial y plus partial Vy by partial x. And similarly, so this is tau r theta and this will be equal to tau theta r. And the expression for tau theta z, which is tau z theta, this will become mu times 1 over r partial Vz by partial theta plus partial Vz by partial z. Now, of course, all these equations you don't need to remember. A handout has already been given to you. It has been loaded on the course site where you can easily refer to these equations. And then Similar to these, in the Navier-Stokes equation, I'm not going to write them. I will refer you to the handout. And the cylindrical coordinates are given, and you have to be careful because extra terms will be there. You don't just copy out what you did in X and Y. So this is thing, okay. Now, in addition to the Navier-Stokes equation, there is also an energy equation, which in White's book has been derived, and this energy equation leads to a differential equation for temperature. But as far as this course goes, I am not going to derive the differential equation for temperature. I will leave it for the heat transfer course. I'll just lead into what we will do in the next 1 or 2 classes. In the next 1 or 2 classes, we will try to study the exact solutions of the Navier-Stokes equations. And as we have seen, exact solutions means we will try to find the velocity field and the pressure field, which in Cartesian coordinates would be functions of x, y, z, t for some flow configurations. What we will find is that exact solutions means we find a closed form final expression for velocity and pressure. But in the next class, we will start looking at the full form of and how we are going to